Recording has just started. So today's agenda is all about robotic process automation. Big word, lots of capabilities, or what we like to call RPA. We're going to talk about what RPA is, why it's important, lots of use case reasons why you would use RPA. And like I said before, we're going to try to keep about 25 minutes or so for a demo and to actually go over the tool and go over a very timely use case from a COVID situation about how it was used in a small city. So we would definitely want to make sure we have time for that. So let's go ahead and get started. To set the landscape for today's discussion, let's talk about the Microsoft ecosystem of services. As you can see, the Microsoft ecosystem of services are all interconnected, and that is what it takes to make Microsoft unique, right? From business automation to productivity services to security, they're all interconnected, and that's really what makes the unique situation that Microsoft has here with this product. It's a great story to tell when you're creating business automation, and sets the stage for transforming your business processes with the low-code tools that, again, provide security across all the services. Now what I'd like to do is, at the center of this ecosystem is the Power Platform. The Power Platform, as you may know, is a low-code platform that can span across Office 365, Dynamics, Azure, or standalone applications. But today specifically, right, we're going to talk about Power Automate and the Power Automate desktop application. Power Automate desktop app is not on this slide because it actually resides on your desktop. It's actually a desktop app. It's not a cloud service. However, it can connect to those cloud services, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Other items to note are data connectors, AI Builder, cognitive services, Microsoft Dataverse, which is the formal, used to be called Common Data Service. These are all where you'll have your configuration files for Power Automate desktop will reside in your environment. So all this stuff is what it takes to actually produce an RPA product. So today is all about automation and using RPA technology and services to save time. People should only have to focus on the tasks where they can bring unique value, right? Basically, we don't have the luxury of time that bots do. So what is RPA? First, a word of caution, Microsoft automation products are being introduced rapidly, and there is a lot of change going on, including just this week. There was two major announcements we'll talk about during this presentation. But license models are also changing, so you need to constantly check back, and I've provided lots of resources, learning resources. Check out my blog later on today, and I've included some links at the end also for lots of resources to keep checking back on, because this stuff will change. Want to make something really clear, though, from a terminology standpoint, RPA is a technology, okay? Power Automate Desktop is the app that uses that technology to run RPA. Power Automate is the cloud service that provides integrations to additional functionality like triggers and connectors to hundreds of APIs. It is also a place where your desktop flows will be saved, as I mentioned before. RPA is a form of business process automation technology based on bots or artificial intelligent workers. In traditional workflow automation tools, a software developer in the past would typically list a bunch of actions to automate a task and then connect them to backend systems with APIs. That is the difference. In contrast, RPA systems develop the action list by watching a user perform the tasks and then record them, and then perform those automations by repeating those tasks directly back in the UI. So bots can interface with any application through the UI the same way a user does. The bots are basically trained by their users to be shown how to complete those tasks, and typically follow the logical rules such as if-then type of conditional statements while writing the databases. Bots can also work and drive existing applications by opening up emails, attachments, going to websites, and so forth. So a couple definitions. First, connectors, obviously these are very API based. They're up in the cloud and the Power Platform. They include things like the data gateway, which will be needed to connect the cloud services to your on-premises desktop flows. A cloud flow is something that's considered, like in Power Automate. These are triggers, right? These are things like events, intervals, time intervals, or schedules, things that take a trigger for some bot to wake up and listen to and then react to, right? So connectors and cloud flows, those are extra costs. RPA alone or the desktop app tool does not cost anything, but once you start adding some more functionality to it, that's where they get you, right? So the desktop RPA tool is all about desktop flows and recording those capabilities, and it is possible to use those capabilities without additional cost, but you'll find out real soon that there's lots of benefits to connect to some of these cloud flows or connectors moving forward. So why invite a human into the automation process? We are not replacing humans, but helping humans work more efficiently and concentrate on tasks that require human-related tasks and interactions. Most organizations are experiencing some form of digital transformation. Every organization has their own pace and strategy, and in some cases, you may want to keep some of those older systems, maybe just because you don't have the money or you don't have the time to modernize them. Sometimes that means keeping your older systems and figuring out how to integrate with them. And with new modern systems, think mainframe. This is where RPA really fits in. With this critical need in mind, RPA combines Power Automate, further empowers automation for your older applications which don't have APIs. With RPA, you can now apply efficiencies of automation to your older systems as long as there is user interface. And that's the great thing about this. If you can open up a user interface, you can record that and then automate it. It opens up a world of automation to include software that's old or new, on premises or in the cloud. So it's a great way to record all these capabilities together. As long as you can open it up on the desktop, you can record it and automate it. In short, robotic RPA, enables us to automate mundane rules-based tasks, and that's what it's all about. Now let's look at the Automate desktop app, right? This was built on technology that Microsoft bought from Softomotive. And some of you may be familiar with the Win automation tool, but RPA is an evolution of that tool that can now be integrated with the Power Automate and Power Platform capabilities. And they've done this in less than a year. They launched it last year in last September, I believe, in an Ignite. And Power Automate Desktop is free. It comes with your Windows 10 licensing or your M365 licensing. But like I mentioned, there are some charges and there's some limitations if you want to use the free part. And obviously, if you want to use the bells and whistles like AI Builder and things like that, there's extra costs. So some key things to know about Power Automate Desktop app is that it's UI based, not API based. So basically any application that has a UI can be automated. Actions like selecting things with your mouse, field entry, copy and paste, screen navigation, logging in and out of applications, database queries. In a few minutes, you'll see how all this works. Madison's going to give you a great overview of what the tool looks like. Now let's talk about how work gets done. Right? Many people are still using manual process, and that's fine. And in some cases, it's definitely needed. Right? Manual processes are prone to error, though, and interpretation. So if you're not a robot, you don't do things the exact same way every time, and that can cause errors and problems. They're typically judgment-based, so that the people have some interpretation, some customer-focused problem solving is involved typically. They contain unstructured items like non-routine tasks. Those are items that you probably want to leave to manual processes. But then if you look at what RPA has to offer, right, it handles tasks differently. There are two main forms of RPA, attended and unattended. And what we're talking about here is bots. Let's start with attended. Always start with attended and work in more efficiencies as you mature your processes. You want to be able to have some kind of human level of control over what's going on. And you're going to see that and hear that today from Madison when she talks about her use case. You might even start with an attended solution, as in the case like of a CRM solution, where you have attended, you're working with a customer on CRM, but at the very end of that, you have all the information you need and you send it off to an unattended bot to finish the work. That's how all this fits together. It's not one way or the other, it can be mixed together. The key here is to go slow. And if you want your first endeavors to be successful, you definitely want to do that. With attended, you see repetition, right? Semi-structured customer-facing type of things, manually triggered types of events. Attended RPA is the collaboration between the user and the bot, so it's also known as the virtual assistant. An attended bot assists the person to execute automation on the person's local or remote workstation. So the key here is you have to be logged in to use attended RPA. It operates concurrently with the person on the same workstation. In fact, you have to take your hands off the keyboard during this process. And Madison will talk a little bit about that as well. Things like cut and paste, triggering of actions, right? User clicking a keyboard, All those are capable of doing in attended. Now, unattended is, where it has to be a lot more stringent. There can't be room for error. In attended, if there's errors, it spits it out to a human to work on. In unattended, it just stops working, and you got to figure out why. These tasks have to be repetitive, rules-driven, structured, scheduled event type tasks. It's the execution of tasks and interactions independent of the user. So the user is not signed in during an unattended RPA session. The bot can run on its own, basically on demand based on triggers that are always listening 24/7. So these are the things that you want to use for your high velocity things that happen all the time, but they're very, very specific about what they do. There's no room for error. They happen all the time. There's the same process all the time. So when to use RPA? Obviously, your business and back-end processes are huge, right? Call centers, financial processes, inventory management, document processing, generating reports, forms, the list goes on and on and on. On the left side here, and I won't go into the use case, but there's a full-blown white paper from Microsoft on it about what Coca-Cola did from a use case of ordering those filters for those soda machines that you see in fast food restaurants, how they were running out. And the old process required every single one to have to be called into a CRM, and then an 11-step process. And they changed that completely over the course of, I'm not sure how long it took, I forgot, but it included 10 people having to do this work, and it freed up all the CRM agents to do this work. And now they have an omni-channel solution where bots are listening in on different levels, either at the CRM chat or the field services or CRM phone systems, the call centers, and it's basically handling all this work for them. So it's a great use case if you want to read up on it. So here are some signals, things to listen for. What things are really great use cases for RPA? Well, obviously manual processes. If a human does not need to be involved in it, that's great use case, and it's very systematic, standard operating procedure type stuff. Perfect for bots and for this. If there's something that doesn't have an API, right? That's the benefit of RPA, is it uses the user interface. If you can open it up on a desktop, you can use it, right? Call centers, we mentioned that. Apps, things to think about, like even doing automation with your mainframe or AS400. Those are all fair game for RPA to start looking at and utilizing, especially if you don't want to modernize them yet. So anything with a documented, repetitive, mundane process, think about things like, what about a FOIA request, right? Those things happen all the time, and that may be attended to make sure that the work is complete and done correctly. But certainly a FOIA request, account unlocks, right? That's 80% of tickets at a service desk sometimes if you don't have a good system. Ticket processing, payroll processing, these are all great candidates for RPA. This is just a use case scenario, and we're going to kind of go into this a little bit more when Madison takes over. This is kind of a more in-depth process, but this kind of just shows you how an invoice processing system would work, right? First, the invoice is sent in by email from a contractor, then Power Automate sends the invoice over to Microsoft Teams for an approval, and then Power Automate then opens up the desktop app and then starts filling in, opening up the invoice application, and then a web-based calculator is used to convert euros to American dollars, and then finally writes it to an audit log, and then it basically sends a kickback an email saying that the invoice has been approved. And so what does this look like in RPA? You've got a combination of things here, right? You've got a cloud flow opening up email, listening to email triggers. You've got that hands it off over to Microsoft Teams, as Teams is a platform. And then you've got a desktop flow that then gets kicked off, which then requires a gateway because you're connecting the on-premise system, right, to the cloud. So you need that gateway. And then basically Power Automate Desktop launches the invoicing application, the SaaS application for conversion of money, and then writes it to an audit log in Excel. And then once that's all done, it kicks it back and sends an email confirmation. So that's kind of, at a 20,000 foot overview, kind of what it looks like when you start looking at RPA and designing this out. So there's lots of way to create desktop and cloud flows, but we're in luck because just this week announced hot off the presses is Process Advisor. This can be found in the Power Automate web service. Process Advisor is a process mining capability built into Power Automate. Whoop, I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, someone turned their video on. That's okay. Hold on 1 second. Second, folks. All right, getting back to Process Advisor. Is a mining capability built into Power Automate that provides insights into how people work and takes the guesswork out of automation. So if you have an environment with lots of processes built into it already from Power Automate, it takes a look at that and then maps the workflows, and it looks for identifies potential bottlenecks across the enterprise. And when you open up Process Advisor, it looks at all that stuff that's inside there. And then it looks for patterns and trends among the apps to find inefficiencies between application switching and usage, and provides details in the process that can then be reviewed and define best usage practices and workflow. So great new tool, just launched this week. Check it out if you have access to Power Automate. It just hit general availability. I believe it's only in the commercial, but I'm not positive yet. At this point, actually, we're running really good on time, Madison, so feel free to take as long as you'd like on the case study, because I think this is really why people really want to hear about this case study. I think it's an excellent use of RPA, and it definitely satisfied lots of results there. So outcomes. Madison, take it away.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So earlier this year, when the COVID treatment was released and basically everyone's game plan was to get the vaccine to as many people as possible, the federal government employed what's called the vaccination hub. I'm not sure if everyone knows what that is, but it's basically it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a hub to give out vaccinations. Before working with Planet, I actually worked with one of Planet's clients, and we were one of these sub hubs. So we were a small city, but we were willing to do whatever we needed to get the COVID vaccination out to as many people as possible. We were working mainly with the fire department and dispatch. So when we were going over it, our fire department chief had set in his mind to average about 10,000 shots a week. And while we didn't always hit that number, we did average about 2,000 shots a day, several days a week. The main issue that we were facing, though, wasn't necessarily how to get the shots out, but how to import everyone's information into the state's vaccination website. So we had people would go to, and I'm not sure if everyone knows what Eventbrite is, but it's a website where it's just a form filling website. So they go to Eventbrite, they fill out their information, they sign up to say, hey, I'm going to go get my, I want to sign up for vaccination on Friday at 8 a.m. And then it would dump their information into a database on our backend, and then we would have the state's vaccination site up, and we would have to just manually import information, almost like a copy and pasting scenario. Now, at that time, the state had put a mandate out that required all hubs a return time of 24 hours, which meant if you signed up for a shot at 8 a.m., we had to have your information along with everyone else's information for that day inside that vaccination site by 8 a.m. the next morning. Do you mind clicking for me, Ken? Thank you. So this became a massive stressor as we were trying to find enough human resources to help tackle the task. Luckily, we were, I guess you could say, we were gifted with 6 to 10 dispatchers. And I'm not sure if you know anything about dispatchers. They're the people that pick up the 911 calls, but we could not have asked for better staff. They were used to working under intense pressure for long periods of time, and they are the fastest typists I have ever seen in my life. Unfortunately, they were coming in before their shifts, after their shifts, and even on their days off. So for a few days, this type of work might be somewhat manageable, but after a few weeks, you could see the physical and mental burnout in these people. So, and on top of that, we were paying overtime. So in the end, it did not seem worth it. So management asked IT if there was a better way to automate it. So we, being in IT, didn't have the time to try and learn how to best automate it because we were already getting out vaccines and we needed something yesterday. So we reached out to Planet, and they actually developed an RPA bot along with teaching me how to use Power Automate Desktop in case I wanted to use it for the future. So it took us about 4 weeks or so, but after that fourth week, we were able to run that bot on 30 different virtual machines, and it was faster than any of the other dispatchers. So because of that, we were able to lower our quote unquote needed people by 4 and only have 2 people on staff to watch the bot for any failures and to restart the process if any of the workflows did fail. So the dispatchers also, so in addition to kind of supervising the bots, they also updated any information the bot couldn't understand. So one of the issues that we had was Eventbrite didn't have any data validation. So for example, it didn't check for birthdays to be put in correctly. And so we had a lot of people giving us ridiculous birthdays, where people were saying that they were born, you know, in the 13th month of 1863. And so the bot it's not AI and it's not smart. So we had to have humans for that. So everything was doing great until the state changed their form to modernize the site, which I can appreciate and understand, and to make it easier for COVID vaccination inputs. Unfortunately, that broke our bot. And so we, as a city, were kind of like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do? Luckily, Planet had taught me enough to where I was actually able to build a second robot for the new form by myself within a week, and we were back to meeting the state's mandates. Do you mind clicking for me, Ken? Thank you. So while everything for those couple months felt like a whirlwind, we definitely learned a lot. Some of the biggest takeaways were the need to have data validation before it reaches the bot. Now, technically, the bot absolutely can manipulate the data and can do data validation. We actually did a lot of, so those birthdays that I was talking about, we had an entire subflow just for those birthdays. But why force a bot to do it if you don't have to is probably the biggest question that you could get out of that. We also had to learn and understand that when a third party changes their website, it can potentially change and break our bot. For example, if you have a button and it's the second item on a list and the third party decides to update their website, and no big deal, it's their website, they can, but they change that button to not be the second item, but now the third item on that list. When your bot goes in, it runs the risk of not being able to find that said button. So on the bright side, the tool can seem very overwhelming when you first get into it, and I'll show you what it looks like in just a minute. But once you get your hands into the nitty-gritty of everything, it's really not that bad. It's just like anything else. And what's really great about it is it's all transferable. So just like most development, whatever you build for one bot can be replicated, or you can use different parts of it to be used for future bots. Do you mind getting the next slide? Thank you. So with that, I'm actually going to kind of take y'all through. I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to walk through a super fun demo. Is everyone super excited? I'm a little excited.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Don't everybody get too excited. Okay, so whenever you open up Power Automate desktop for the first time, you're going to see this. And so you can add your new flows up at the top left. I already have a workflow built out, so I can either run it from here, or I can edit and go into the debugger mode. I can run it from there, and this is where we're actually going to build it. So, but before we get into that, I just want to show y'all kind of what it looks like. This is where you're going to be editing and creating these bots. And if it looks a little overwhelming, don't worry about it. Again, it's once you get into it, it's really not that big of a deal. One thing that I want to point out is you've got this canvas where this is where all the steps go. Over on the far left, you have all of your actions. I think Ken was saying that there's like 400 plus actions. Some of the ones that I want to talk about are the kind of the basic developmental ones where you have your variables that you can play around with. You've got conditions, so you have your if else statements, you got your switch statements, you have loops. So, and then you have waits. So this can be really helpful if you're waiting for a website to load and you don't have the option. You can say, hey, I don't care, you know, what's going on, wait 10 seconds before you click this button before you go here. So no big deal. But it also has some other really cool things. So you've got the file form filling. So instead of trying to say, trying to devise a way to basically fill out a form online, you can just say, launch Chrome, and then go to, you can say click on a button here, add text input here, check this checkbox, things of that nature. It interacts very well with Excel. It interacts well with SQL and Outlook. So lots of mail stuff that you can do. Also, something else that's really nice to know is the mouse and keyboard. So because the software is like brand spanking new, sometimes the buttons don't always work exactly like you want them to work. And so sometimes we have had that scenario where we have to go in and kind of tab through a website, which is totally fine. I mean, that's why they have that feature out there. And so you can actually send keys to where it'll tab through, and then you hit enter, and it's just like utilizing your mouse. So we also have PDF, not to continue to go over all these amazing actions, but you can also talk about or deal with PDFs and FTPs. So I think those are pretty helpful, especially for government.
I don't think you mentioned OCR, but you got OCR as well now, I saw.
Yes, you do have OCR. So we have 3 options that we can do for OCR.
Very good.
Yeah. So up at the very top, this is where you can save, run, where you basically debug. This is also where you can record your steps. Because let's say, for example, I know set variable is up here, so I can either search for it, or if I'm like, or I guess a better one would be form filling. So if I want to say click, I'm like, I don't remember exactly, click the button. It's something, I don't know the exact words. I can go to desktop recorder and actually open up the website, click on the button, and it will find, and it goes, oh, you mean this step, and it will add that step. So over on the right-hand side, this is where all of our variables are. It also has input and output variables. This is that's more helpful for when it starts to integrate with the cloud flows. So input is exactly what it sounds like. It's if you're running a cloud workflow first, and it inputs variables into your bot. And then it says, here are your variables, go forth and do your thing. And then it does its thing, and then it can create output variables to send back to the Cloudflow and goes, hey, this is what I found. Or for example, if you were to create a workflow that says, hey, I want you to go into this account or into this account software and find this account. And so your input would be find this account based off the ID. The bot would go in, open up the software, and it would output that user account. So in addition to the variables, you also have what's called UI elements. So any buttons, any links that you click. So what's really nice is it does give you that preview. So if you don't name it very well, you can come back in here and you can go, okay, what was that thing? Oh, I know that was the uninvoiced button or drop down. So, and then you also have images. So the images are really helpful because there's a move mouse to image, something that we ran into in that COVID scenario was clicking on buttons sometimes worked and sometimes didn't. Again, it's a new software. And so there's just going to be some bugs sometimes, but we were able to solve that with move mouse to image. So basically you drag and drop and you say, hey, this is the quote unquote picture that you're looking for. And when you find it, move the mouse and send a click. And so we were able to click the button that we needed. So does anybody have any questions as far as, are you seeing anything on here where you're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this means. Otherwise, we'll get started on the actual demo. So, and if I talk really fast, I apologize. I get very excited about this. So if I need to slow down, anyone just kind of like say, hey, Maddie, slow down. Okay, so before we actually start diving into the demo, I guess I want to say that this demo in particular is showcasing, it's not really a use case, but it shows you what it can do. So it interacts with the legacy app. It does a currency conversion by interacting with a website, and then it adds to an audit log by interacting with Excel. So I think we were going to take this time. Let me run it real fast just to show you the end outcome. And then we're actually going to build this. We're going to replicate this. So let's click run. And again, just to remind everyone, we can either click run on here, or we can click on run whenever we first open up Power Automate desktop. So, and just so that everyone's aware, my hands are completely off my keyboard and my mouse. It is important that you don't touch it because you don't want to mess up the bot. So it's doing the currency conversion, and I know you can't necessarily see. Okay. But so what it did is it did 3 steps. So it added this 1037 ID into the invoices, and it submitted. So we see it's invoice $1,000. It went in here, it opened up Chrome and found the currency exchange for the $1,000 into euros. And then it went into this Excel worksheet and basically imported it in. So at that point, if you wanted to email this, if you wanted to just save this, if you wanted to throw this into another workflow, you totally could. So let's build it. So I'm going to move this way. Whoa. Let's go to new flow, and we're going to say you already own it. Demo. Getting things ready. I'm going to move it over here. Okay, so as you can see, we have a blank canvas, beautiful to work with. We have no inputs or outputs, no flow variables. Okay, so what we're going to do is we always start out with a main subflow. So you can comprise of different subflows, and that might be a good rule to follow is you don't want to have one massive flow. You want to make them as modular as possible so that if you need to tweak anything, if you need to add on, you don't have to make it terribly complicated. So because we're not touching everything else, because we're not touching like the cloud flow, we're not, it doesn't know what the amounts are, what the variable is, or what the variables are. We're going to have to just set it in here. So I can either go to variables and say set variable, and then again, you just drag and drop. And so I set, and it's going to be account. Actually, let me show you Contoso. You can't see what I'm doing, but I'm pulling up the legacy app so that y'all can see. So we have an account name, a primary contact, and then a contact email. So an account, contact, then an amount. So we need to basically set those variables. So account, we'll just say Planet Technology, let's save. And then, so I can do a couple different things now. I can either go find it again and drag and drop. I can search for it up here, set variable, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense because I already had it open. So I can come in here and say contact name, say Madison Spanos for fun. Now, something else that I can do is I can copy and paste. So we're going to do Control-C to copy and then Control-V to paste. And so that's really helpful if you're having to duplicate a lot. And in fact, just so everyone's aware, I can even highlight multiple items and I can copy and paste again, and it'll throw everything down there too. So Control-Z works as well if you go, oh no, I didn't mean to do whatever I just did. So the keyboard shortcuts are really nice. So we're gonna just do contact is in Spanos at goplanet.com. And then we'll do it one more time for amount. Something for everyone to note, if you do decide that you want to start building in RPA, is for variables, you're technically supposed to have these percentage signs before and after, and it lets our desktop it lets RPA know that it's a variable. If you have it under set, sometimes you don't have to add it, but sometimes you do. So let's just say $600. Okay, so the first thing that we did was we ran the application. So again, I can either search for it or I know that it says run application. So I'm just going to search for it. So drag and drop. And it says, where's the application path? I'm going to go into my C drive. Okay. And then I can open different window styles. I can, after the application launches, I can say, wait for application to complete, to load, continue, no big deal. Something to note is you have these on errors, which I can say, if it fails, retry X amount of times. I can also say, if it fails, throw an error or continue the workflow run. You can put this on one step, or you can catch several steps. So just so that everyone knows that. But we're going to keep it pretty simple. It won't fail, so we'll just not worry about that. But notice how if you do put something, it has that little shield. So we're actually going to, we're going to clear all. Thank you very much. Okay. So a good developer is always going to test. You don't want, so I'm going to go ahead and run this just to make sure that it does exactly what we want it to do, because God forbid it doesn't do what we need. So it opened. Fantastic. No errors. We're good to go. We'll keep moving on. So when it opens, what do we need to do? We need to hit new invoices, and then we need to fill it out. So I can either go in and go find all those steps, or this is when I can use the desktop recorder. So I'm going to hit that. Sorry, I don't want everyone to see that. And give me 1 second. Okay. So I can hit record. And so now it's recording whatever buttons I click. And you can see that it's trying to read. So if I come in here and click the title bar, it's going to say, okay, she's clicking the title bar. So we're going to click on new. And you can see that it's coming up the steps. Click on invoices. And then we're going to click on account. So for right now, I'm just going to say planet, contact, amount, 700 is invoice, and then hit save. Okay, so if I hit finish, I now have all of these steps done for me. So I didn't have to know what step I was doing. It just did it for me, easy. And it even tells me when it started and when it ended. Which is, I guess, something else to note is you can do comments in here too, which are really nice. And I highly, highly, highly recommend you always use comments. So right now it says populate text field and window with planet, with contact, with 700. Okay, so this is great, but we actually want to say Planet Technology, Madison, Spanos, 600. So we're going to come in here, and instead of doing planet, we can either, because I know that, I should know, account. So I can either do, remember the variables have parentheses, so account. Or if I'm not entirely sure what the variable is called, I can click on select variable and I can actually find it. And I go, okay, it is called account, cool. So I click that. So now this got changed to dynamic, and you can tell that it's a variable because it doesn't look like a string. It actually has, it's filled in. So we're going to do the same thing with everything else. We will say contact. Contact, yeah, okay, so that's contact name. So contact name, where to that. And then the $700, a amount. And then we have the combo box where it selects invoice. We want it to say invoice every single time, and that's fine. And then it selects the save button. So if I wanted to I know I'm not going to do this for everything because that would take way too much time, but if I wanted to, I could say click UI element and say, click on UI element image 2. Okay, that's clearly the save button. So I can come in here and say rename save button. So now it's readable. And so I would recommend everyone do that for their own workflows, but for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to say you can do it. So we have clicked on all those. So now if I were to run this again, it should do Planet Technology, Madison Spanos 600, no big deal. So let's run it just to test it again. There we go. Perfect. Okay. So what was the next step? The currency conversion. So this is what I was talking about when I say we want to keep it kind of modular. So I could technically continue to add it onto this, but that would make it super big. And again, if something needed to change or we decided that we don't want the currency conversion anymore, I would have to go and like sift through a super long workflow. So I'm just going to add a new subflow. So I add it here, say subflow. They can't have spaces in between them or in the name. So I'm just going to say currency exchange, save. And so that I don't forget, basically I want it to run this and then I want it to go ahead and run this currency exchange subflow. So we're going to say run subflow. And again, you are more than welcome to sift through all these actions and find whatever you want. But I don't have time to do that. So run subflow, currency exchange, notice how it comes up. Notice how there's not a place to add one. So if you don't have it already created, it's going to freak out and go, what are you talking about? So make sure that you create your subflow and then you say run that particular subflow. So currency exchange. So this is when we can open the web reporter. And it's going to say, what do you want to open? So I like to use Chrome. So I'm going to go ahead and just open up Chrome and say hit next. And so over here, it said launch Chrome and navigate to that. I don't necessarily want it to navigate to that. So I'm going to say navigate to google.com. So, and then I'm going to look up. So and notice how it changed. It said navigate to google.com. Fantastic. So now that we're ready, we're going to hit record. And just like we did with the desktop application, we're going to go into this input text field. And we're going to say currency exchange. Enter. And then we're going to input this. And we're going to change it to 12 or something. It doesn't necessarily matter. Then we're going to hit finish. I'm going to show you why in just a second. So it opens the new Chrome. It populates with 12. We don't want it to populate with 12. We want it to populate with that amount. So remember, we can either click and find it, or we can come in here and do the percentage amount. Okay. So we have it. So basically, we want to grab this 10.06. So we're going to get details of element on a web page. So I'm going to drag and drop, and I'll do it below there. And it's going to say what browser. So if you can't tell, launch browser and save the instance to browser. That means this guy is browser. So we're going to go fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes, it's browser. I can also do drop down and say, okay, I only have one tab open, so it's only talking about browser. So UI element. remember, these were all the buttons or anything that we're trying to like screen scrape off of. So notice how I don't find what I'm looking for. I'm like, oh man, okay, we're going to add a new UI element. So we say add new UI element, and it goes, where do you want to add it? So I know the red button isn't where it's supposed to be, but we're going to go ahead and hit Control, come on, bud, and hit the left click. And so it's going to go this guy. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to hit save. And we can double check by going into the UI elements. Okay, let's try this. So, because again, we are, let's just say 15. So something else that you can test is instead of having to run through the entire workflow, you can come in and say, and right click and say run from here, which is really nice when you just want to run a section of your flow. So let's check it out. Let's see, exchange, 15. Okay, now, did it grab the 1257? It did, and you can tell because, okay, so A, it's supposed to be 1257 because it's right there, but it says grab the attribute of blah, 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 and save as attribute value. If I was a good developer, I would rename that variable to something that made sense to me, but right now, we don't necessarily care. So attribute value. Whenever you run a workflow, your variables are going to show up on the right. Attribute value, it pulled in that 1257. So even though that red box wasn't where it's supposed to be, we ran it and we tested it and it's correct. So we're just going to keep moving forward. So now that it does the currency exchange, we're basically going to redo the same thing. So now that we put the invoice into the legacy application, we've done the currency exchange into euros. Now we're going to add it to our audit log. So I'm going to hit new subflow because again, we have to have our subflows created first. Add to Excel. We want to make sure that it's named exactly what it is, what it does, because we want it to run subflow. Does anybody have any questions, I guess, while I'm like running through all this? I feel like I'm flowing kind of quickly.
Yeah, it's obviously a lot for people who've never seen it before. We definitely have Josh standing by on the chat session. So if you have questions, please go ahead and ask them. We don't have to wait till the very end.
Yeah.
I think you're getting an idea of how this works. It's a combination of giving it an example, right, to see how it's supposed to grab something, and then letting the intelligence figure out that from that point on to keep going, right?
Exactly.
So train the bot to understand where you're going each time. It sounds to me like you're pretty much, for each major step, you're creating a separate subflow. Is that correct, Madison?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah.
So if
you ever have to edit it or something or make changes, it's much easier to find the steps in a tabular way, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So if you want, I can keep going. Otherwise, y'all probably have the idea of what it's doing. So, I guess, Ken, do you want me to keep going?
I think people probably, unless we can take a vote, okay. If people keep seeing it, we can keep going. Otherwise, we can stop and spend some time asking questions. I only have a couple more slides related to wrap things up.
Okay.
If you're interested in this, we do offer a app in a day for a low price, or possibly even covered with the cost of your vouchers. We're looking for Microsoft funding as well, possibly as an option. But if you have vouchers, this is a great option to use those vouchers to get possibly work on an example from your work, to get a good idea in the course of 8 hours of how to actually create a simple, well, not a simple flow, but an actual RPA real use case, right? So pretty much the use case that I mentioned in the presentation about the invoice from start to end, from getting the invoice in via email to sending out the confirmation email as part of the lab environment for that RPA in a day. So by all means, reach out to us if you're interested in doing something like that as a follow-up.
Sorry, I was going to say, do you want to take over for the sharing your screen?
Sure. Let me go ahead and continue on here. All right, so as we're starting to wrap up, please, again, Josh is standing by. He's ready and willing to answer any question. No question is stupid. Believe me, I ask lots of questions. It helps me learn, as we go through the process, because a lot of it, I'm not a developer by trade, but it helps after you've seen this and gone through it in a formal setting. So that's why I'm really suggesting the RPA in a day thing with us. But licensing, obviously, there's nothing simple about licensing. But in general, I'm not going to go over this licensing model with you, but in general, if it touches Power Automate, in other words, if you're connecting your on-prem desktop recordings to the cloud type of capabilities of Office 365, which you don't have to, but if you want to use those capabilities or those connectors in the cloud, that's when one license is needed for a user license, a per user license, and it's about $40 per month. And who knows if that's going to change, but this gives you kind of an overview, a 10,000 foot overview. I've got lots of resources about licensing, and if you're interested in knowing more about licensing, you can certainly reach out to us over You Already Own It, and we'll happy to walk through your use case with you and kind of give you an idea of what's it going to take, but really what we're going to need from you though is to help. We need you to kind of storyboard out what the use cases you're trying to accomplish, so that we understand all the bells and whistles you're trying to do. And again, what you really want to do is keep it simple at first. You want to have a successful experience with RPA using attended, obviously attended type of mode, and then grow into that, right? Add some AI eventually later in the future if it's not available in GCC. But there's no reason not to start playing with some of these tools, because they are, as you heard from Madison, they are being used in real life production, and they would not have been able to do what they did without some modern technology and some bots doing the work for them. Another thing I don't know if everyone caught on, because it was this is very expandable, right? So when Madison realized, we can't just do it with one user logged in, we expanded this out to 30 BMs all at once with that same user account, right? So you don't have to have 30 licenses to do that. It's that same service account that you're using for this model, right? So it's very expandable if you have a situation like that. And obviously that's been proven out with this use case that we talked about. As you can see, there's lots going on here from a release perspective and from a licensing perspective. I've given you lots of resources for licensing. Check out my blog. There's lots of information in the blog about licensing and kind of how to get started. And just want to kind of wrap things up here to summarize what we've seen today, right? What is the promise of doing more and working less for all? It means automation at scale, right? It means accelerating productivity, minimizing repetitive manual tasks in favor of more strategic work for humans to really concentrate on and get the value out of what their work is doing, scaling automation efficiently by using things like Power Automate, integrating with services like AI, Azure M365 Dynamics, integrating data across on-premise software as well as cloud software. So really combining those two together to complete your business processes. Integration securely, right? So if you have DLP or any of your security already set in other parts of Office 365, that carries over with this. And I don't know if this is, once you start using RPA, it's tied to an environment, right? So a use case could be an environment, or you could have a department tied to an environment. There's all kinds of governance discussions to be had there, and that's really important to start thinking about as you move forward with looking at RPA and Power Platform in general, right? You don't want the Wild West with everybody in the world creating Power Apps and Power Automate flows in the default environment. That would be a complete nightmare and a complete mess. So you really need to start thinking about things about how to lay this stuff out, how to start doing some development. And finally, reducing costs, reducing errors. That's what this is all about in automation and using these tools. I've put lots of resources up here. I can't say enough about these resources. This first one, this Automate community, is your one-stop shop for everything that you want to know about Power Automate. It does include things about RPA. The videos are great. There's some excellent tutorials there to check out. Again, I mentioned my blog. Make sure that was posted in the chat window, so definitely check out the blog. And if you're ready to get started, like I mentioned, start thinking about Power Platform governance and think about launching that. Microsoft has this Center of Excellence environment that helps you set the framework for Power Platform, right? This is like putting those guardrails and those boundaries in place and being able to understand the insights of what's being done in your tenant and seeing who the users are, if there's orphan flows, if there's flows that aren't being used. All these things take up very expensive tenant capacity resources in the back end, right? So you tenant owners need to be aware of what's going on in your Power Platform. You can't just let the Wild West happen. Download Power Automate Desktop. It's free. You know, most folks have Windows 10 enterprise licenses or M365 licensing. Get started. That link is hot on this PowerPoint deck, and it's also in my blog. And then lastly, like I mentioned, if you have those Microsoft vouchers, we're also looking for other funding methods or low cost, how to do these RPAs in a day. So those are things that we'll start scheduling immediately following this session today. So think about doing an RP in a day. Madison's going to be doing those, and it's about an 8 hour. Is it 8 hours, Madison?
Yeah, it's about 7 hours or so.
It's a full day with, is it 1 or 2 labs?
One lab, one massive lab.
Yeah, so I definitely, if you're going to be attending these things, you have to be committed, right? You have to make sure that these folks are ready to set up a test environment. So if you've been through some of these workshops with us, these dashboards in a day for Power BI or something like that, it's very similarly run, right? Where we start off talking about an overview of the service, and then we slowly get into more details and then finally do a lab, right? So that's what this is all about. We really appreciate your time today. We can certainly open it up to questions, and we're happy to stay as long as there's questions. So we'll go ahead and open up the microphone or chat questions in, and we appreciate your time. Thanks for coming today. We'll go ahead and stay here, and feel free to chat up any questions you have right now if you have any, or ask questions in the chat window. All right. We appreciate again. Oh, how do you deal with processes that take time for data to replicate? We have tried new user setup a few times, and it just works because the time to process is unpredictable. Josh or Madison, thoughts on this or follow-up questions?
I can take that. And then Josh, if you have anything that you want to elaborate, you can elaborate. So we actually ran into that where when we were building that RPA app for the COVID vaccination stuff, because there were times that it would, that everyone was trying to enter into the website. And so it would make the web pages load really, really slowly. And other times it was super quick. So you can do a couple different things. On some of these options, whenever you run an application, whenever you open up a new web page, there is an option that says wait for the web page to load, wait for the application to load. So you can do that. Or there's also that wait function. It's not super great practice, but yeah, but just like Josh was saying, you can put in a wait for the window. Yeah, or you can say wait for 10 seconds if you know that it's going to take 10 seconds tops. It makes them a little slower, but if it's not terribly time sensitive, it allows you that time to wait.
And that's a great question, because it's funny, we were just talking about this right before this session about best practices and what's better to put some kind of timer on it or to wait till it finishes. And certainly if you don't want to throw an error, waiting for it to finish is the way to go, obviously, because the timer may fail sometimes, right? So there's lots of things to think about, like your great question there. Yeah. Great question, Ken. Any other questions? We happy to stay a little bit longer. All right. With that, we thank you again for your time today on You Already Own It, and be on the lookout for our blog. My blog, it's in the chat window, so definitely take a look at that and think about scheduling an RPA in a day. We appreciate your time. Thanks again.